no other space, and this is one of the main points I make in my article, was left for reflection. That is, you were either a denier or you were an advocate of this CO2 global warming campaign, and there was no space for anyone else. So anyone who raised any questions, wait a minute, what is this scientific evidence here, was immediately cast as a denier, or to use old-fashioned language, a blasphemer, a heretic, what have you. You were either with the terrorists or with us, as George Bush put it. It's a Manichaean world. There were only two places to go. And if you went with the deniers, then you were with ExxonMobil. If you went with the advocates, then you were with Texaco and BP. Take your choice. What about those who didn't want to be with any of them? That is, those who stuck to the agenda of the anti-globalization movement, the anti-corporate global justice movement. Where was the room for them? And there wasn't any. So what I've done, and a few others, Alexander Coburn and my colleague Denis Rancourt, have been challenging what has become this hegemonic advocacy movement, which has pretty much co-opted just about everyone on the left. And it's remarkable. It's really astonishing, because now you have people who identify as leftists, as people on the left, in bed with, I'll say, some of their most robust and creative enemies. Very worrisome indeed. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you refer specifically in your article to George Monbiot, who's been vocal in both proclaiming the extent of the issue, global warming being the case, and in proposing solutions. What's your criticism with him?
Well, again, I don't know George Monbiot. I know that he's running around trying to sell his book, and he's been going to these environmental fairs and these green fairs to sell his book. So he's got a personal interest in this, obviously. Although I don't want to dismiss him on that count. But the main problem I have with his work is, as he readily confessed in an article, a rejoinder to Coburn, he knows nothing about the science. He's simply relying on the IPCC, which is a group of scientists and policymakers whose reports are massaged by a whole range of actors, including governments. And he's relying on the authority of science. In his response to Coburn, and in his book, there's a naive deference to science. I mean, I'm a historian of science. I've spent the last 35 years writing about the politics of science, the social construction of science, the sociology of science, as have many others. And it's as if none of it has ever happened. 50 years of radical critique of science, starting in the early 60s with Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And it's like it never happened. So you have George Monbiot, a man identified with the left, defending himself against Coburn by appeal to what's called peer review, peer-reviewed journals. He uses that phrase 4 times in his 2-page rejoinder to Coburn. Coburn's work is not peer-reviewed, or he's not referring to scientists whose work is peer-reviewed. Peer review was invented in the 1950s as a bulwark against the democratization of science. What peer review is about is restricting the credibility to those who are peers, namely those within the privileged circle of science. Let's not forget that the real founder of the modern environmental movement was a person who didn't have a PhD and was not part of the peer, and that's Rachel Carson. Okay. So to have a leftist resting his case on peer review is almost laughable to me, a disgrace, really, and pathetic. And not only that, he and others, most recently Justin Pudor on ZNet, attacked me and Denis Rancourt and Coburn as anti-science. Now, the epithet anti-science was precisely that epithet that was leveled against those who were criticizing the politics of science over the last 50 years. Now we have leftists using that phrase anti-science to criticize those who who challenge the new dogma.
I think we're going to have to pick up this article, this issue of peer review in science at some other occasion. But before I let you go here, I'd really like to ask you, how do you think that eco-activists can avoid having their efforts in this area appropriated by the corporate agenda?
Well, they should really focus on their real agenda, which is revolution. That is the idea that the environmental concerns can be separated, disengaged from the political agenda is fatal, and that's exactly what has happened. That is, the anti-globalization movement was profoundly concerned with the state of the planet, okay? But that was tied in with a confrontation against power. That is, the concentration of control and power in the hands of corporations and governments. And that has been utterly abandoned.
Well, thanks very much for talking with you this morning.
Well, my pleasure.
I've been talking with David Noble. David Noble is a professor of history at York University. His most recent book is Beyond the Promised Land, The Movement and the Myth, and that's being published by Between the Lines. For more information on the global warming debate, you can find a link to his recent article in Canadian Dimension on our website.